Okay, I've got the mounting plate just set in place temporarily before I bolt it down. I wanted to show you some of the modifications that I had to make to adapt it for my saw. Now, if your saw is a cabinet style saw with the Biesmeyer fence system, you really don't have to do any of this. It doesn't call for it. But since mine has a fence that rides on this angle iron rail and it hooks onto the rail when you clamp it down to lock it in place, there's a few little adjustments that I had to make. One of the adjustments is I needed to make a channel the same shape as the bottom locking, cap of the fence, so it could ride smoothly. So with this in place, my fence, if I can get it to move, will ride in there with no problem all the way down. And of course, if I didn't have stuff on the other side of the fence, it would ride smoothly. The second thing that I had to do was on the back of the mounting plate, I had to drill some 1/2 inch deep holes, about 5/8 inches round, to account for where the bolts are that mount this iron and this iron in place. So that way the mounting plate, when put into place, will sit all the way back. One last thing that I did on this is on the bottom I cut a small 45 degree so that way it would sit back in this iron all the way without catching in this back corner here or throwing it off. Now that is the modifications for the mounting plate. The only thing that I have to do now is take a 3/4 inch round over and round over this bottom edge here so that the table can swing and everything without any problems. Haven't done that yet. That's next. One thing that I did have to do for this bottom angle iron, and I found it out just a little while ago, was I had to create a shim to go behind the iron. And the shim has a small degree. I want to say it's like 87 degrees. I mean, just a real small degree to it. Because of the design of this angle iron, when this plate was mounted up against it, it was throwing it off. And it wasn't squared up with the table. And it took me a couple of tries to get the right shim, the right degrees down there, so that way when I mounted this angle iron here, that it was completely square with the table. Before the shim, because of the shape on the back side of this angle iron, it was kicking it up and it was off square by about 2/30 seconds, which doesn't seem like a lot, but over that 6-inch span of the mounting plate, that 2/30 seconds grows. And it was kicking up the back end and causing, it wasn't square with the top of the table, that the mounting plate wasn't flat with the top of the table and flush. So after I got the right shim degrees, like I said, it was about 87 degrees. I mean, just a real small amount of cut. Now that everything's square, I can go ahead and I made some marks on the back of my mounting plate to coincide where these holes are, and the holes are for these bolts. As I said, now you can see them a little bit better that we're down at this angle. But with everything in place, the mounting plate can sit flat against the back. That's why I cut that little 45 degree off the back so it didn't interfere with that. It can sit flat with this. And all I have to do now is take some 1.5-inch lag bolts and bolt them in. And the reason why I drew those lines are because I don't want to put a lag bolt in where those holes are, just in case I go up. I don't want to hit one of those bolts. The plans called for this mounting plate to be 5 3/4 or 5 1/4 inches wide. I think it was 5 3/4. And I went 6 inches, and I decided to leave it at 6 inches. The reason being is my dust collection is here versus some cabinet saws it's kind of down at the bottom. And when the plans were made in the Woodworkers Journal magazine, it had a cabinet saw with the dust collection right at the base, the bottom base of the saw. Well, my dust collection is here and it travels along when I tilt the blade and everything. So what I want is when the table is folded down, it doesn't interfere with my dust collection and it doesn't hit it or anything like that. That way I can use the table with the outfeed down or up, and there's nothing is interfering with one another. Other than that, that's the only little modifications that had to be made. I've mostly followed the plans all the way through. Just a few of the measurements were a little bit off because of sizes and things like that. And if it's something that you decide you want to build, the thing that I suggest is go by the plans as your guideline, and then make the adjustments as you go to accommodate your saw. Alright, now on a flat surface, I want to go ahead and take the table and the mounting plate and flip them face down so the bottoms are facing up. I want to take 3 half-inch spacer blocks and place them in between the mounting plate and the table. Now, I want to take a 5/16 inch bit, preferably a brad point bit, but I don't have one, and I want to, making sure that I'm up against where I need to be, everything is nice and flat, I want to go ahead and make an indentation where I need to drill my holes. Once I have my mark, then I want to take a 1/4 inch bit, and as straight as I can, I want to drill a 1/4 inch pilot hole about 3.5 inches deep, and that way it'll get me started for my 5-inch 5/16 inch lag bolts. My drill bit is about 3 inches long, so I'll go ahead and bury it. And you want to make sure that you are as straight as possible when you're drilling. Okay, with the table propped up, I got it shimmed up so that my holes are in line with one another. I'm ready to go ahead and install the 5-inch by 5/16 inch lag bolts. I've got a lag bolt and a washer here, and a driver would work great, you know, in installing these, but I don't have a driver socket out. It's buried and packed away, so I'm going to do it by hand. Alright guys, with those 2 lag bolts in, we're ready to start working on the leg assembly underneath. The table folds up nicely, and man, that's going to be some great space for an outfeed table. So now underneath we have to do some work to set up the brace for the leg support, get it mounted so the leg support's open, and then I'll show you how to level the table out and get those adjustments on that leg just right, so when it's fully extended it holds it at a level position each and every time. So up here under the table saw, while the table is folded up and propped up on some legs, I'm mounting the resting plate that the leg, when extended down, will rest into to support the table. Alright, with the help of a couple of clamps, I've got the leg extended into the rest. What I need to do now is go topside and put a level across the table saw and outfeed table and make sure everything is level straight across. If it's not, I just need to make a couple adjustments until it is. And then, if you remember up here, we put a barrel bolt onto the bottom side of the table, and we drilled a hole into the side of the leg for the barrel bolt to catch. So what that means is we have an extra one of these catches to use. And we're going to use that on the bottom side here when we get everything level for this barrel bolt that's on the leg. We're going to screw it into place where it needs to be, so when the leg is in the extended position, all we have to do is lock it into place and it'll stay. This barrel bolt acts as a support for keeping the leg in its closed position as well as its open position. So I'll go level the table and then we'll get this mounted. Alright, with the outfeed table clamped into position, what I want to do is take some type of straight edge or level, and I want to lay it across the table saw and the outfeed table. Now if you remember, when we made the mounting plate, I said we're shooting for about a 1/16 inch light of the top of the table saw. We want the mounting plate about a 1/16 inch less, and that's what we have. But as you get out to the end of the outfeed table, your level and everything should rest nicely on the outfeed table and the table saw with no rocking. Once it's set, then you go down beneath and install that little clasp for the barrel bolt in the open position. Go ahead and get it installed, and that will be what holds the leg into place. Well, the outfeed table worked great, and best of all, when I don't need it, I can simply fold it down out of place and save all of that room in the shop. And that sliding dovetail leg works perfectly. As a matter of fact, here in the very near future, you're going to see me making some fold down work surfaces. I'm going to be making some benches on the side of the walls in the new shop using that sliding dovetail leg. So that way I have workspaces when I need them, and when I don't, I can fold them down against the wall and have all of that open space. Now the two work surfaces that I'm going to make are going to be on both sides of the table saw. So when I fold them up, they will be the same height as the table saw and give me all of that extra room so I can actually work with full sheets if I want to. So stay tuned for those. Now there's one last thing we need to do to the outfeed table to wrap this whole project up, and that is taking our miter slots and extending them into the table. I'm probably going to go about 12 or so inches, but I need to go ahead and route in these 3/4 inch wide miter track across and out, so that way when I'm using my sled and everything, I'm not being stopped. I can pass right by into the outfeed table with no matter what size sled I have. I don't need to run my miters all the way to the end of this table. I only need to go a certain distance, just as long as I have plenty of room to operate my sleds without any interference. So how I'm going to do that is I'm going to set up a jig using some guide rails on both sides of the miter slot, a router with a bushing, and I am going to route these out the same width is what I have here on my table saw. Shouldn't take very long, and then we'll call it a day. Okay, to cut some miter slots into the outfeed table and the mounting plate, I went ahead and mounted and clamped some 1x4s, the very straight 1x4s to the table saw and the outfeed table. I have them running parallel with my miter slots on my table saw so that this channel spans that gap. Now on the router I have a guide bushing and a 1/2 inch bit. What I want to do to set up is make sure that when my bushing rides along the inside of this track that I'm cutting the same exact width as the miter slots on my table saw. I have everything set up and clamped into place. I got a stop block here that will allow me to stop my cut where I want it. I'm going to make it in 2 passes. I'm not going to cut the full depth in 1 pass. I'm going to make it in 2 passes, and then from there we'll do the other side, and that will be it. Okay, with the miter slots cut into the outfeed table and the mounting plate, when I use jigs such as my crosscut sled or my miter gauge, I can go right across into the outfeed table with no hang-ups, and everything flows smoothly and is in line. The outfeed table was a little bit of a challenging build. It took me a little bit to get to it, but it's going to be a great addition to the shop. I want to thank you for sticking with me through the build. I hope you enjoyed it, and hey, if you ever need an outfeed table, think about a folding outfeed table. It's a good way to go. And again, that leg that slides on that sliding dovetail, that's going to be a great thing for me to do in the future for some fold down tables. Until next week, guys, see you soon.